Felix walked slowly up the white steps, some of which were cracked from time. The bank of the Snova River flowing through the city was high. To reach the embankment, one had to climb several flights of stairs. Felix wrapped himself in an old down jacket. It was a chilly gray November. The wind chilled him, and the icy grit from the sky made it worse. Here by the river, the temperature was much lower than in the city. The approach of winter was clearly felt. Felix pulled his knitted hat over his ears. There was no way he could get sick. If he got sick, he would have nothing to pay for a bed in the hostel, nothing to buy groceries with, not to mention medication. The life of a homeless person is like that. You can eat as you walk. I've known worse times. I've had to sleep on a heating vent and look for food in a dumpster. It's been a long time, but I managed to get out of it, Felix thought. I've tried to organize my life and everyday existence until the fulfillment of the main dream, buying my own home. Of course, that's still far away, but it's already much better than it was. Felix grew up in a small village with a speaking name, Oiki. Surrounding this place were aspen groves, especially picturesque in the fall. Little Felix, even as a kindergartner, tried to draw them, these beautiful trees. As he grew older, he also diligently transferred what he saw to paper, but nothing worked. I guess I didn't have enough talent, he mused. Childhood is the happiest time of life. Felix, a grown man, often remembered his early years with nostalgia. It wasn't just that at that time he had a roof over his head, his own bed with clean linen, a guaranteed bowl of soup every day. It was that he was loved then, he wasn't alone. Grandma, sweet, kind grandma, Mary, wise and forgiving of everything, was warm. It seemed to Felix for a long time that she was omnipotent. It was Grandma who always found the right words to dispel her grandson's sadness and anxiety. She was the one who understood how to act in any given situation. She was respected by her neighbors. She seemed to know everything in the world. And Grandma was also never tired, at least Felix couldn't remember her sleeping. When he went to bed, Grandma was still doing chores, and when Felix woke up, she was already on her feet, washed, combed, and smiling. Grandma was a strong woman, tall, statuesque, and energetic. She could not stay idle, always found something to do, and worked, kept the household, and raised her grandchildren. Yes, this woman did not look like a gray-haired old woman in a Miley shawl. No, Felix's grandmother was still young. That's how he remembered her, energetic, active, and businesslike. Later, Felix acutely missed his grandmother's gaze, her warm embrace, and her gentle, lulling voice. He sobbed at the impossibility of changing everything, blamed himself helplessly, and screamed into the void. Hopelessness, that's how Felix would characterize his state. It was not terrible to lose the house during that period of time. That moment was almost not important. The main thing was his grandmother. Grandmother was no more. Felix had no other relatives. It so happened that in Oiki, where almost everyone was related in some way, either as brothers-in-law or distant relatives, it was strange, but what could be done? Grandmother Mary came to Oiki as a young girl after her husband, who, by the way, was also called Felix. The grandson was named in honor of his grandfather. He was a good man, kind, hardworking, and skillful. At work at the sawmill, he was appreciated, and neighbors respected him. But Felix grew up in an orphanage. He didn't know his family. That's why he probably dreamed of creating a strong, big family. Once, he went to work in a village located almost 100 kilometers from Oiki, a rare wilderness. There he met a beautiful, modest girl named Mary, and so it turned out that eventually they got married. Felix and Mary moved to Oiki, to Felix's house, and began to live as a family. Felix worked at the sawmill. Mary got a job on the farm as a milkmaid. Everything went well for them. Everything was fine and smooth. They lived soul to soul. Both spouses dreamed of a large family and at least 5 children. But it didn't happen. The couple had a daughter, Kate. The young parents were not going to stop at this achievement, but the years went by, and Kate remained the only child in the family. The girl grew up beautiful, not resembling her mother or her father. They were simple rustic people, and this was a white-boned, fine-featured girl with a fragile figure, huge violet-colored eyes, and golden curls. She was a princess. The locals joked that Mary hadn't found such a beauty somewhere in town, but Felix had no doubts about his wife's fidelity. The man did not know his relatives and rightly assumed that the daughter resembled someone from his side of the family. The girl's character matched her appearance, languid, capricious, and self-loving. When Kate grew up a little and realized that she had favorable looks, she became proud. Kate's parents were simple and hardworking people. Their family lived no worse and no better than others, but Kate was sure that she deserved more. She dreamed of living in a big city and blamed her parents for the fact that they did not bother to move there in their time. She demanded toys from her mother and father, then outfits and jewelry. She refused to do housework, arguing that she was not going to stay in the countryside for long and needed to study, not sweep floors. Except Kate wasn't studying, or rather she was studying, but not what they teach in school. She bought magazines and tried to make herself look like one of those models that flashed on the pages of glossy publications. She did makeup, washed, and painted a new face again, achieving the perfect result. She learned how to combine closet items correctly to make different hairstyles out of her golden hair, and it all started around the age of 12, maybe even a little earlier. "I'll go to the city, become a photo model, maybe even go abroad, but I'm not going to live in a dump like you," she said. Mary and Felix just looked at each other in confusion, both blaming themselves for the fact that their daughter turned out like that. But what had they done wrong? Mary herself had grown up in absolute poverty and even starved. That's why she probably tried to please her only daughter, and she was so beautiful. Felix, in general, did not know parental love and was brought up in an orphanage. What can be said? The man spoiled, of course, long awaited his child. And yet both spouses tried to instill in Kate basic moral principles. By their example, they showed that it is necessary to work, it is necessary to respect others. Mary taught her daughter to bake pies and clean the house, but the girl from childhood rejected parental attitudes, and all her appearance showed that she dreamed of a completely different life. When she became a teenager, Felix and Mary did not listen to her. They were losers who didn't know anything about life. "You have no right to tell me what to do," shouted Kate at her mother and father when they tried to reason with their princess and force her to learn to help them in the household. "No, you don't. You haven't accomplished anything on your own. One works at a sawmill for a penny, the other one shovels manure in a cow shed, and yet here you are. I'm not like you. I want to live differently, and I will. I'll marry a rich man or become a model." Who's going to marry someone so inept? Kate's father tried to talk her out of it. "You can neither cook nor clean. Your mother still takes care of your laundry and ironing. I'm not going to marry a village idiot. I'm going to marry a rich man, they have servants for all that." There was nothing her parents could do to change Kate's mind. She became more and more capricious and more angry. She didn't want to study, she didn't help around the house. She had only one thing to do, flip through fashion magazines and spend time on the street with friends. By the way, Kate had plenty of admirers on the street. Well, how could such a beautiful girl not? It was not only boys from school but also grown-up guys. That's what frightened Mary and Felix most of all. They had conversations with their daughter, but she just laughed in their faces. Felix tried to be tough, locking his daughter at home to prevent misfortune, but Kate always escaped through the window or took a moment when her mother and father were distracted and ran out the door. She wanted company. She wanted to see admiring glances, to hear compliments. It all fueled her self-belief and her confidence in her own irresistibility, even more convinced that she was worthy of some mythical better life. In another life, Beauty dreamed of getting to the other life the easy way. Studying at school and then at university was not interesting to her. The girl believed that it was too long and difficult for those who were unlucky to be born with beauty, huge violet eyes, and golden curls. All this was told to Felix growing up by a neighbor, Grandma Molly. She called his mother Kate a tomboy. Grandma never spoke ill of his mother, only sighed about her fate and blamed herself for missing her daughter somewhere. But Grandma Molly cut the truth right to the bone and didn't try to soften the edges. Your mother's a beauty, I can tell you that, but she's a lazy bum. She wasn't very bright either. She wanted to fly high, but she didn't have the brains to do the math, so it turned out the way it did. It's not your grandparents' fault. They did everything for their daughter. They're good people. It's just genes, I guess, from Felix's family. He grew up in an orphanage. Who puts their kids in a place like that? Not the good ones, just people like Kate. If it wasn't for your grandmother, you'd have had to grow up in an orphanage too. Kate was barely 18 when she skipped out of her parents' house, not to study in the city like many other village boys and girls, but to follow her fiancé, a guy from the city. A student came to Oiki with a local boy, his buddy, who had come to see his parents, and he brought his classmate with him. The groom's name was Mark. He was also at university and already had his own car. His father had given it to him when he came of age. Mark was handsome and stylish, just like an actor from a youth show. Naturally, Kate immediately met him. The country beauty charmed the young man, and between them, a lightning-fast romance began. This same Mark took Kate to the city, and they began to live together in his apartment. Mark was studying, Kate was a housewife. She even condescended to cook and scrub floors to get a foothold in the city. Mark and Kate lived a carefree, fun life thanks to the money of the young man's father. They went to clubs and restaurants, even went on a trip. Naturally, Felix went to the city and tried to bring his wayward daughter home. He realized what was going on, but she flatly refused to go, and there was nothing he could do. Kate was an adult, so she had the right to run her own life as she saw fit. Kate had already spent too much time in the village. Her parents got her a job as a clerk in the local store since she didn't want to study. The girl dragged a miserable existence, continuing to dream of a beautiful life. Kate was angry at her fate, at her father and mother, at the local village idiots who couldn't fulfill her dreams. What kept her from running away to the city, even to nowhere, were her parents. They endlessly persuaded her to get smart, read tedious lectures to their adult daughter, explaining it all by fear for her future. Kate would have run away from them without remorse, but where to and with what money? The girl tried to send her photos to a modeling agency, but to her own surprise, she did not receive any replies. She thought that the offers would fall on her like a cornucopia, but it was just bad luck. Kate continued to think over the plan, communicated on dating sites, received a lot of compliments and offers, but she was afraid. She hadn't seen these people in person. There's no telling who might be on the other side of that monitor. It was her parents who planted those fears in her, which made Kate hate them even more. And then Mark, the prince, showed up in a black Audi. He was the one who saved the beauty from captivity, took her away from the hated, dirty village of beggar parents and moralizers. That's how Kate perceived her departure, running away, breaking free. It didn't work out with Mark in the end. He quickly found someone else. But Kate was in no hurry to return to the village. She had a new beau of lower status than Mark, but that relationship didn't work out either. But a new one loomed ahead. Kate lowered the bar lower and lower in the choice of suitors. Suitors changed one after another. One thing remained unchanged. The girl lived at the expense of these people, gave them her tenderness, youth, and beauty, and in return received a roof over her head, food, some gifts, and trips to cafes and clubs. Kate's life was not exactly what she had dreamed of, but she wasn't going back to the village. Felix and Mary were heartbroken to see what their daughter was becoming. Her once golden curls had faded, her voice had become rough and hoarse, and her skin had taken on an unhealthy hue. Kate drank heavily and started smoking. All this, of course, reflected both on her health and appearance. Felix was very worried about the path his only daughter took, such a huge shock for a father. Mary kept hoping that Kate would come to her senses and get over it. She'd had enough of this life with one man and another, and they were not such wealthy and handsome young men as Mark. They were more like wrinkled, marginal-looking men, but they worked somewhere, so they had money. Kate lived in the city at the expense of her admirers. From a golden-haired princess, Kate had turned into a gray woman with signs of disadvantage in her appearance. It was hard to imagine she'd ever looked so different. She dreamed of a rich, beautiful life and spent hours achieving perfect makeup. Kate was going downhill fast and didn't seem to notice it at all. She felt quite happy and did not want to return to the village to her parents. Felix's heart ached for his daughter, and in the literal sense of the word, the man suffered 2 heart attacks in a row. Mary, too, of course, worried, but in her heart lived hope that everything would turn out all right. Kate was still young, after all, but Felix seemed to realize that nothing good could come out of Kate. Felix didn't survive the 3rd heart attack, so Mary was left all alone in the village house. No husband, daughter leads a wild life in the city, not exactly the way Mary imagined her old age. At least she had a job. The woman still worked as a milkmaid on the farm. There was socializing, there was life, and at home, loneliness, cold, 4 walls. On New Year's Eve, Kate came to visit her mother. Mary, seeing the dear guest, immediately began to clutter to collect the table. The daughter looked badly thin, pale, with a puffy face. When Kate took off her jacket, Mary gasped at the round belly tucked under her sweater. Kate was pregnant. Apparently, she'd been pregnant for a long time. It turned out that the father of the baby was another suitor, Kate's trucker. He rented an apartment in the city and earned good money, enough for living and drinking when the intended was not on a voyage too. Pregnancy, of course, was not planned, it just happened. Learning about what had happened, the admirer was scared. He confessed that in another city he already had a family, a wife and 2 children. He didn't need heirs on the side. He gave her money to solve the problem, but Kate was turned down by the hospital. All the terms were out, and there was no indication for termination as the baby was developing well. It was surprising considering that Kate, being in a position, did not deny herself a drink. Further, everything was ridiculously banal. The suitor ran away, the heels were clicking. Kate stayed in their apartment for a few more months until the lease was up, but she had nowhere to go. Who wanted her? She'd failed to pick up another suitor, so she'd return to the nest. Mary hoped things would work out for them now, and the fact that the child wouldn't have a father was no big deal. He would grow up well, he would be taught and put on his feet. The woman was counting on Kate's maternal instinct to kick in. Motherhood would change and make her more soft, loving, caring. It didn't work. Kate barely survived to give birth in the hated village. By the way, the baby was born prematurely, weak and very small. He then spent almost a month in a couveuse. Kate immediately wrote on her son's refusal. She didn't want him. He was premature, obviously sick, so she gave up the baby at the hospital and went back to the city. Now she could again live in her own pleasure, go to cafes and restaurants in search of a new love, and have fun without a pot belly. Everything was better, everything was easier. After learning about her daughter's deed, Mary rushed to the maternity hospital and explained the situation to the people. She was understood. The waiver was destroyed. Mary's neighbor's niece worked there as head doctor. That's how it was resolved through her. I had to find Kate, though. In order to draw up the documents for the baby, you needed the presence and signature of his mother. Kate, at first, stubbornly insisted that she did not need her son and it would be better for him to go to an orphanage. But Mary convinced her daughter the boy should stay in the family. She found a reason: I'll take care of him. Don't worry, live as you like, but you'll get an allowance for him and a lot of it. You're a single mom on the books. Mary took this step for her grandson. Her daughter talked her into it because of child support. Otherwise, Kate would never have agreed to keep the baby, and Mary wouldn't have gotten custody. And the conditions were not ideal, and the age was already solid. So little Felix stayed with his grandmother in Osiki. Felix knew his beautiful mother Kate only from the stories of his grandmother, neighbors, and their photos. The woman was not interested in the fate of the child, so she came sometimes to his mother to lie down, to rest between the next complicated novels. In the memory of Felix remained something, some vague image, a woman who smelled pungent, husky, noisy, unpleasant. She was yelling at his grandmother, demanding something from her, and little Felix was scared. But of course, Felix could not remember his parent well because Kate was gone when he was barely 4. Another roommate in a drunken brawl did not calculate the forces well, and in general, the outcome of Kate's life was very natural. Grandmother later told Felix many times that she survived in that period after Kate was gone only thanks to her little grandson, who had to be taken care of. Felix and his grandmother lived poorly, times were difficult, and the salary of a milkmaid did not imply luxuries and excesses. But Felix still considered his childhood a happy one, energetic, strong, caring grandmother, friends, soft bed, the aroma of pies and fried potatoes. Yes, Felix did not have an expensive computer, consoles, branded sneakers, what else is considered the highest joy in the lives of teenagers. But he never went hungry and did not wear rags. Felix tried to help his grandmother in everything. As he grew older, he realized that the life of his dear and beloved person was not easy, turbulent. The boy tried to please her as much as he could. True, studying did not turn out well. Grandmother was engaged with him, tried to explain complex topics, but something didn't add up in his head. And all here, it was because Kate drank when she carried him, said Grandma Miley. Grandma's neighbor, they sat in the kitchen, drinking tea and thinking. Felix couldn't hear a thing. Yes, but who cares, waved Grandma's hand. The main thing is a healthy, strong guy and kind. Not everyone has to be a scientist, and Felix will find his place in life. He's so handy, like his grandfather. Felix was really handy at fixing things, at making things, that's just like him. And no one taught him how to do it on purpose, he watched how others did it, grasped it on the fly. Not like math. By the time Felix finished school, the financial situation of their small family had completely deteriorated. The farm paid a pittance, his grandmother's pension was also very small, especially compared to the ever-increasing prices. Felix worked part-time, mending neighbors' fences, cutting people's grass, digging potatoes, even helping with the construction of houses. But these earnings were not regular and small. With those grades flaunted in Felix's certificate, it was not worth thinking about going to college, and even more so, university. But the guy still decided to go to the city. There are more opportunities to earn, to settle in life, and his grandmother needs financial help. She's been dragging him around for so long. Go, Mary said. Yes, you're a serious guy, you got a backbone. You're not as worried about you as Kate was. You're not going to get lost, you'll stay on the straight and narrow. Just be careful, you're still young, and there's a lot of danger out there. Don't worry, Grandma, Felix put his arm around Grandma's shoulders. Everything will be fine. I'll go to the construction site as a laborer. I can knead cement, lay bricks, plaster, and paint. I'll find a good use for me there. I'll earn for an apartment, and I'll take you right away. Grandmother smiled, but her eyes were still sad for some reason. Though she said that Felix would not be lost, apparently, she still had a premonition of trouble. The city, at first, stunned and even stunned Felix, crowds of people rushing somewhere, streams of cars. No, the guy, of course, had been to the city before, but it's one thing to come with his grandmother to go shopping or to draw up some documents, it's quite another to be here for a long time alone, to become a resident of this bustling metropolis. Where to start? Where to go? Felix found several advertisements in advance back in Orsini. Construction sites often needed workers, so he decided to give it a try. The young, handy guy was gladly taken on to build another supermarket. The object was almost ready, finishing work remained. The brigade did not have time, they needed helpers. Felix fit the bill, he was even provided with a roof over his head, carriage house. True, he had to share it with the workers, but it was nothing, and it was free. Having received the first money, Felix immediately rented an apartment. He wanted to start looking for a job again, but the job found him. One of the workers who lived with Felix in the booth called him to a new object. They will pay well, assured the bearded man, just that the calculation on the results will do all then and get the money. Felix did not object to this settlement scheme. He had money set aside from his last earnings, so he actually did not worry about what to live on all this time. The work was going on. The dispute Felix was anticipating that very soon he would get good money. Then he could send some to his mother. The guy knew she had debts. She borrowed from neighbors to send her beloved grandson to the city. She was afraid to let the guy go without any money in his pocket. Soon he'll pay her back with a receipt. She's going to be so happy. It didn't work out this time. The owners just screwed the laborers. Maybe it was the bearded man who took Felix's money and ran away with it. Maybe he was the cheater, realized Felix was green. It was useless to appeal to the police or labor inspection. No one signed official agreements and contracts with the workers. No one would take their word for it. Felix was in a desperate situation. The money he had put aside had run out. He had nothing to pay for his apartment, and there was almost no money left even for bread. The guy spent all day running around the city looking for work. As luck would have it, unskilled laborers were not needed anywhere. And one day, after another unsuccessful attempt to get a job at a construction site, Felix wandered towards the bus stop. He was filled with a whole range of unpleasant feelings: fear, despair, resentment. And then someone called out to him, "Hey kid, are you looking for a job?" Felix turned around. Behind him stood two guys about 25 years old, tall and blackly tanned, obviously also laborers from the construction site working on the street. That's where those windy tanned faces and broad palms with dirt embedded in them came from. "I'm looking," Felix nodded. "Why?" "Because we need help. It's not a big deal, the task of one thing, to unload into the car, but the pay is good." A doubt crept into Felix's soul. What if it's another scam? The guy didn't want to step on the same rake anymore. He wanted to now try to get an official job. But there's still no way out. He had to stay in the city to find a job. To do that, he's got to pay the rent. He's got to have money for food. So the guy decided to take a chance. "I'm in," he said. "Good," the interlocutor shone. "So, we'll meet here tonight at 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock at night? Felix clarified. It seemed strange. Why so late? "The owners are leaving late. We'll follow them into the house, start taking everything out. They don't want to be involved in all this fuss. That's why they pay well." Felix shrugged. The rich have their quirks. "I'll be there," he promised his new acquaintances. In due time, Felix was at the place. The guys he'd arranged with in the afternoon were late, or maybe they wouldn't show up at all. Felix wouldn't be too upset. Of course, he needed the money, but these people looked too suspicious. They didn't seem sincere. They were fake. Felix kept thinking that they would cheat him, would not pay like the bearded man. But the guys showed up a few minutes late, but they came. Or rather, they came when an old broken-down truck with an open back stopped in the parking lot. Felix didn't even look at it, didn't even think it was after him. But the driver's door swung open, and one of Felix's daytime interlocutors looked out. "Why are you standing there? Hop in, we're already late." Felix obeyed and settled into the seat next to the driver. The other guy was here too. He said a discreet hello and stared out the window again. Unlike his buddy, this second guy was silent and frowning. They drove for a long time, almost an hour. First through the city, then on the highway, then on a country road. Everything that was happening seemed more and more suspicious to Felix, but he realized that at this stage, there was unlikely to be a quick and easy way out of the case. At best, these two will drop him off at night without a penny in his pocket somewhere outside the city. At worst, he didn't want to think about it. The driver joked from time to time, smiled. Felix had a strong feeling that he was being brave, trying to appear calm and relaxed to himself, but he was worried. The second, as usual, was silent, did not react back to the words of his friend, just looked at the road. Finally, the truck stopped near a plot of land surrounded by a high fence. The driver opened the gate with a key. Felix exhaled. Since he has the keys, then everything is really okay. "You stay in the yard, we're going into the house," the driver ordered. "We'll hand you the boxes, you'll put them in the truck. It won't take long." The guys disappeared into the house. Felix noted that they also had a key to the front door. It was silent and dark, as it is only in the countryside. Large stars looked down from the sky. Felix involuntarily admired the night sky. He remembered his native Orsini. He thought about his grandmother, wondering what she was doing now, probably drinking tea with Grandma in the cozy kitchen. An old woman always talked about him. Felix felt like going home, to the only person he knew. He wanted to be a little boy again, for whom Grandmother is a loving and all-powerful being. From pleasant thoughts, Felix was interrupted by a hoarse voice of the driver. "What are you dreaming about standing like a pillar? Take the box." Felix obediently dragged the container into the truck. As agreed, the box was heavy. "I wonder what's inside of books, dishes, maybe just some household stuff." No sooner had Felix returned to the porch than the silence of the September night was broken by the wail of a police siren. The darkness was struck by the glow of a flashing beacon. Felix hoped the police cars would drive past the station to the scene of the accident, but they stopped right outside the gate. What happened next happened quickly. Felix's brain recorded separate frames. Here the garden is filled with people in uniform. Some of them rush into the house. The other part begins to search the plot. Felix is thrown to the ground, easily as if he weighed nothing. His arms are twisted painfully behind his back. His face is tickled by dry blades of grass. Sand is stuffed into his nose and mouth. Felix sneezes once or twice, and it becomes hard to breathe. Someone roughly turns Felix's face sideways. The boy greedily gulps for air, the dark gut of a police box. Felix sits handcuffed on a hard bench. There are uniformed men nearby. The driver and that other guy are nowhere to be seen. They seem to have escaped. That's the conclusion Felix draws from the scraps of phrases exchanged by the law. Where are your accomplices? Felix, a sturdy man in camouflage, addresses, "Do you know where they went?" Felix shakes his head negatively. He wants to explain to these people that the runaways are not his accomplices, that they met for the first time only this morning, that these guys just offered him a job, and Felix needed the money. But Felix doesn't say a word. First of all, he doesn't think they'd believe him. The guy replayed his speech in his head and realized it sounded very improbable. Secondly, his tongue was too big and clumsy, and my mouth was dry. I was very thirsty, but Felix did not dare to ask the policeman for water. "Do you even know whose cottage you are going to rob?" The man in camouflage turned to the frightened guy again. "Prosecutor Oliver's data, that's whose data. You'll get the full measure now." Then Felix was interrogated. The investigator, a middle-aged man with a tired, angry look, asked the guy questions like a hardened criminal. Felix told the truth. He, of course, was not believed. No doubt about it. The two men had escaped, gone into hiding. They were being sought. Felix had assumed the cops wouldn't succeed. Now he was sure he'd met experienced criminals. They'd probably get away with it. But what would happen to him? Felix was sent to a holding cell until morning. Dark cell, hard bunks, a very special indescribable odor, a calm and silent neighbor who didn't even ask what Felix was in for. All day long, this big, scowling man lay on his shelf and stared at the ceiling. Sometimes he would be taken away, and then Felix would be alone. It turned out that the truck in which the thieves had come for him had been stolen. They decided to pin this car on Felix too. It was useless to explain to people in shoulder straps that Felix does not know how to drive a car. He didn't have time to learn. "I don't even have a license. It's easy to check. We have half the country driving without a license. That's no problem." The trial was unexpectedly quick. Only a few days after the arrest, the grandmother was present at the hearing. She'd been notified in time. Felix didn't expect to see her. He was in the defendant's place. All the evidence was against him. He was ashamed to look his grandmother in the eyes, although Felix realized that he was not guilty of anything. But Grandma doesn't know. She must think he's a criminal. Grandma, mother, looked thin and aged. There were shadows under her eyes, there were more wrinkles. Her gaze was anxious, sad, but loving. She looked at Felix without judgment, with tenderness and love. It gave the lad strength. When the judge announced the verdict, Felix's eyes darkened. He realized that he would not be acquitted but expected a much lighter sentence, even secretly dreamed of house arrest. He was not a repeat offender, after all. 8 years and a maximum security penal colony, the judge's verdict sounded ruthlessly. Grandma gasped, clutched at her heart, turned gray before her eyes. What is it? He is a child, almost stumbled. He was confused by adult criminals who had tricked him and then ran away. It's clear as day. So Felix went to a colony in another region. Long, gray days stretched out, similar to each other like twins. Wake up, a meager breakfast, work in the industrial zone. A walk in the cramped prison yard, sometimes searches and inspections, lunch, dinner, periodic medical examinations, occasional holidays for the prisoners. The dreary monotony, specific odor, dirt, despair, fear. Felix was always lucky with his neighbors. They were much more human than the guards. Each had his own complicated fate. Felix, as the youngest, was even pitted in his own way. They realized that it was unlucky for a young, naive guy to meet dangerous people on his way. Felix now had a lot of time to think. He passed his universities, recognized people, learned life. Now the guy clearly realized how naive and stupid he had been. Felix would not fall for such a bait again, he'd act differently. But you don't make a fist after a fight. Sometimes Felix's grandmother came to visit. At each visit, Felix noticed new wrinkles on her face. The boy was growing up, the grandmother was getting older. Felix knew that she now had heart problems, and he realized who was responsible for the illness of the native person. Of course, he worries for his grandson. Did their job reward the grandmother with a serious ailment? She needed an operation, but it cost money, and where to get it? Felix knew that the grandmother had tried several times to appeal for leniency for her grandson, even hired lawyers, only it didn't work out. Felix answered to the full extent of the law, and only because the victims included a prosecutor, and such people are known to have great connections. How many times during these 8 years Felix dreamed of going back to that ill-fated day and refused the offer of two strangers to earn money? His whole life would have turned out differently then. It's okay, grandson, everything happens, his grandmother comforted him. Felix tried to be brave in front of her, but she saw everything, understood everything. You've been cheated, that's what happens. The price is high, of course, but it's just the beginning of life. You'll make up for it, everything will be fine. Felix smiled. These words of his grandmother made his soul feel lighter and warmer, and it really began to seem that everything will work out. The main thing, he has a dear person who loves, who waits, who will never deceive and will not betray. And then his grandmother suddenly disappeared. Felix was worried when she didn't show up for his birthday, usually always appeared by this date. But here, no word, his grandmother's phone didn't answer. Felix asked the guards for her cell phone several times to make a call. There were also kind people among the guards, though they were not supposed to allow prisoners to make calls. But these calls were useless, long beeps, that's all. And then Felix was finally summoned to the visiting room. The guy flew there like he was on wings. He was relieved. He imagined already how to hug his grandmother, how to say that he missed her very much. But on the familiar gray sofa sat a neighbor, Grandma Molly. She was tense, anxious. The boy felt the ground slipping from under his feet. He immediately realized that the worst had happened. "Oh, Felix," Baba Miley whispered, clumsily hugging her neighbor. "You've grown so long, but you've lost weight. Don't they feed you here or what?" Then, in a broken voice, every now and then wiping her eyes with a handkerchief, Grandma Molly told Felix the terrible news. Mary's dead. She'd had a heart attack, so the ambulance didn't get here in time. And how she dreamed of waiting for you. What plans she made, sobbed Grandma Molly. You could see that she had not yet come to terms with the loss of her neighbor's friend. She couldn't wait. The funeral was organized by the neighbors. It seemed that someone was trying to get Felix to go and say goodbye to his grandmother. No way. It's not allowed. That's all. Not that they didn't let him go. They didn't even tell him about the tragedy. How come? How can it be? Felix mumbled. How can I come home, and she's gone? There's nowhere to go back to. Grandma Molly looked at Felix in confusion. You don't know, do you? Turns out after Felix went to jail, Grandma Mary took out some loans, thought good lawyers would get her favorite grandson out of jail, only it didn't work out. Even with good lawyers, the loans were secured against the house. Consequently, when the owner died, the property went to the bank. It was another blow, much less sensitive than the first, but still, the house isn't just a house. It's Felix's place of power, quiet, cozy harbor with which the guy has a lot of pleasant associations, warm memories, and now what? Someone else will live there. Since then, Felix felt lonely and not needed by anyone. No grandmother, then why is he on this earth? What for? He used to think to please his grandmother, to watch over her in her old age, trying for her, striving for something. Now what's it all for? But we have to live somehow. So Felix adapted to the cold and darkness that settled around him. He ate, slept, worked. Everything was automatic in his head, and in his head constantly appeared scenes from his childhood where his grandmother was still very young and strong. And Felix promised her that he would be a support for his grandmother in her old age. But the grandmother never lived to be old. Liberation did not bring the expected joy, rather the opposite. Where to go? What to do? Where to sleep? What to eat? There were more questions than answers. At least Felix had accumulated a small sum of money over the years of working in the industrial zone. With it, the guy went to the city. Where else? Not to Icky. Felix realized that no one was waiting for him in the village, even though Grandma Molly said she was ready to take him in. She invited him to visit her after his release, but the boy realized that those were just polite words. Why would she want a criminal in her house? In the city, Felix spent money on hotel and food. The savings melted away in a week, but also the hard times began. There was a lot of things and had to sleep on the street, get into street fights, and eat from the garbage. Felix got sick a couple of times, so he thought he wouldn't make it, and he was even glad of this outcome, but the young organism recovered, again and again. And nobody needed him. Gray, dull, joyless life continued. Felix tried begging for alms, he got a serious beating for it. It turned out to be a whole business, and you can't enter it just by choice. The guys scavenged in garbage cans near restaurants and cafes, always found food, and in the city dump, you could find clothes in season. Felix didn't even want to think about what he had become, a dirty, ragged bum. His grandmother should have seen him. No, this wasn't what Felix had envisioned growing up. Like he was disgusted with himself. Then one day, Felix passed by a house under construction and noted in passing that the tiler puts the tiles incorrectly. It turned out that not all the construction skills had withered out of his head yet. The master was surprised, looking at the homeless man incredulously. Then followed his advice, appreciated the result, smiled, and the unbelievable happened. Felix was offered a job. Of course, he jumped at the opportunity. The foreman's name was Jack. He had his own little construction and installation company. The guys were doing minor repairs, erecting small buildings, and the crew needed some smart guys. So Felix got a job. The pay, of course, was not much, but the man was happy about it after so many years of hunger and wandering. A permanent job seemed like a gift of fate. Jack appreciated Felix for his diligence and dexterity. Over time, he learned the young man's story and helped him a little to settle in life. For example, suggested that it is not necessary to rent a whole apartment or live in a hotel, it is too expensive. It is much more profitable, in Felix's situation, to sleep in a hostel. It turns out that the city has such budget lodgings, huge rooms filled with bunk beds. It cost a penny to get a bed for the night. Now Felix fell asleep in a warm bed. Dozens of neighbors snored around him, but this did not embarrass the man who was used to much harsher conditions. Felix had a job. He no longer slept outside. And Jack, he became something of a mentor to the man who'd been marginalized, helping him with paperwork, big purchases, hospitalization, and so on. Jack advised Felix to start saving for his own place. You can't stay in a hostel forever. A man needs his own corner, even if not a luxury apartment, but at least a small one on the outskirts so that there was a place to lay his head. And Felix began to save a little month by month. The man always kept his savings with him and made a secret pocket on his shirt. When Jack found out about it, it made his head spin. Are you out of your mind? Who does that? How? Felix didn't understand. Where do I leave them? Like a treasure buried in the ground in the woods? Not as a treasure, but as a deposit. You and I will open a bank account. Felix was afraid to trust the hard-earned money to the bank. He had been cheated many times in his life and quite cruelly. But Jack convinced him, and now homeless Felix even had his own account. The man replenished it with enviable regularity. The numbers kept growing. Someday Felix would be able to realize his dream and buy a house or an apartment. Living in a hostel had its advantages. Felix often met a variety of people, amazing fates, sometimes complicated, sometimes even scary. A lot of different stories. People in the hostel reminded something of fellow travelers on trains, generously sharing with each other details of life stories. It was fascinating. Felix regretted that he had never really learned to read and write. If he had been able to write well, he would have published a thick collection of stories. People would be interested in reading about the lives of others. Some stories were a treasure trove of wisdom and experience. One day, a new neighbor took the bunk bed adjacent to Felix's bed. He was a man a little older than Felix himself. He came not alone but with a boy of about 6 years old. The child and the man looked incredibly similar to each other. The same green eyes with a slightly sly squint, copper red hair, kinda pushki on the face and hands. You could tell father and son. Alex and Tim. Little Tim, like most of the permanent residents of the hostel, had a hard history. Felix recognized it around the third or fourth day of being neighbors with the red-haired couple. Alex, just like Felix, grew up in the countryside. He was raised by his mother. The man did not know his father. They lived poorly, but they did not starve. There was always food in the house. His mother worked. Alex studied well, and tried hard. He had a dream of becoming a lawyer. It seemed to the boy that people of this profession are practically heavenly help. They resolve disputes, do justice, and, importantly, earn well, so they can afford an apartment in a big city, a beautiful car, traveling to the sea. You see, I wanted to take my mother to the sea, Alex told Felix in a confidential whisper. The light was already off in the room. From the numerous bunks of the hostel came a measured snore. Little Tim was also asleep, curled up under the blanket. Alex and Felix were having a conversation, a pleasant, almost friendly conversation. Felix told his neighbor about his fate. It happened simply and naturally, and now Alex answered frankly to frankness. Alex realized that it was hard for his mother to carry him alone, and he dreamed of growing up soon, of getting on his feet, of making her life a fairy tale. Mom had never been to the sea. She couldn't pay for such trips, but she dreamed of going. Alex, however, watched movies about the sea, took a long look at the photos of acquaintances from beach vacations. It seems that she even dreamed about the sea in general. Alex entered college to study law, went to the city, settled in a dormitory. His mother stayed in the village. The boy's dreams were shattered gradually. He learned that lawyers are not always on the side of truth. Often you have to adjust to the situation, to people. This was discovered in practice in court, and the tasks that are solved by representatives of this profession often have nothing to do with something heroic. Most of the lawyers are engaged in registration of real estate or at all paperwork in offices for pennies. That's how one of the college professors put it, and Alex had no reason not to trust him. The kid's down, he thought. It was worth to enter in everything. Fate is arranged. A happy future is guaranteed. But no, still Alex tried, studied. After all, there were other lawyers, fighters for justice, defenders of the offended and oppressed. It was difficult to get through, of course, but there is always a chance, a small one though. The older Alex got, the clearer he realized, everywhere you need goodwill, money, and he, a country boy, has neither. Alex finished his college and somehow got a job in a public utility office, going through papers for pennies, just like the teacher had told him to. There were a lot of lawyers looking for work at that time, so the inexperienced college graduate was glad to have the job. Everything is not on the labor exchange. He rented a room in a dormitory and adjusted his life. His mother was happy for her son. After all, in the city he got a grip, made his way. She was the only person who believed in Alex's brilliant future. This faith kept the guy afloat, forced him to move forward. He worked hard but looked for more interesting options, true without success. All the good places were occupied firmly and for a long time. It seems that there were even queues of Blatnick wishing for them. But Alex tried not to be discouraged. He had almost no doubt that sooner or later luck would smile on him. And then his mother died. Alex lowered his head. Even in the semi-darkness, Felix could see that the man was barely holding back tears. He could see it, that wound still hadn't healed. The heart, as the doctor said later, had to go to the hospital for an operation long ago. And my mother, she thought it would go away. She kept taking pills, putting off going to the hospital. I know why. They wouldn't let her off work. No, of course, they would have sick leave. Sick leave. But while she was getting treatment, they would have fired her. Somehow they'd find a way. It's happened in our village before. Everyone needs healthy young workers. And Mom, she was afraid of being left without money. She had no one to rely on. I wasn't good enough to protect the benefactor. I was barely making ends meet myself. How could I blame myself for that, for not being there for my mother, for not having the time? Alex was taking the loss hard. The realization of what had happened came gradually. Felix understood his hostile neighbor like no one else. Alex's stories seemed to take him back to the time when he was suddenly left without his grandmother. Felix felt similar feelings and also endlessly blamed himself for not having saved a loved one. I don't know what would have happened to me in the end, Alex continued. Maybe I would have lived like a robot, or maybe I would have done something stupid. All sorts of thoughts were running through my head at the time. It's hard to even remember now. But then Polly came into my life, and everything started to go back to normal. I don't even know how to explain it. Anyway, she got me out. Polly got a job as a janitor at the same utility company where Alex worked. A sweet, modest girl with constantly anxious gray eyes framed by fluffy eyelashes. At first, Alex didn't pay attention to her. Newcomers often appeared there and then left. The turnover was explained by a combination of large volumes of work, neglectful attitude of superiors, and very modest salaries. But one day, the guy literally ran into Polly in the corridor, hurrying to the next office, and ran into a girl moving towards him. And as soon as he didn't notice Polly, yelped. Alex grabbed her by the shoulders and held her so that she didn't fall. I'm sorry, the guy muttered. He was about to continue his way when he saw her eyes. No, of course, Alex had met Polly before, and in the courtyard, at work, and in line at the cash register, and in general at meetings in the canteen, just on the street. But he had never noticed her. After his mother's death, everything around him was gray and inexpressive, but those eyes were bottomless lakes from which it was impossible to look away. Touching eyes of a deer from a Disney cartoon, so much anxiety, so much trepidation. Alex suddenly felt himself next to this girl, as someone strong, confident, almost omnipotent. He wanted to be near her, to take care of her, to protect her from the dangers of this life. For the first time since the tragedy, the boys suddenly felt alive. They stopped right there in the corridor. Each of them had forgotten where they were rushing to. Alex apologized for hitting the girl, smiled. Polly started to assure him that it was nothing, word by word, and somehow, the young people agreed to the first date. That's the story of acquaintance. Soon, it turned out that Polly and Alex have a lot in common. First of all, they are the same age. In the second place, at their young age, both are already forced to break through in this life independently. Both Polly and Alex had no one, neither older relatives ready to help them in life, to become mentors and support, nor close friends. That's just the way it happened. Polly grew up in an orphanage. In the first place, she knew nothing about her parents, except that both of them were alcoholics under the fences. That's the characterization the teacher used when telling the girl about her past. The child was taken away from the marginalized couple because the girl was in danger with her parents. Did these people love her? Were they trying to bring her back? Polly didn't know for sure, but she assumed not because, if to other pupils, even sometimes someone came, swollen, unkempt mothers with dirty caramels, homeless-looking fathers, decrepit grandmothers, lowered, lost, but still relatives and not indifferent people, then Polly, in general, no one and never visited. And she wanted so much wanted to see her own, to feel their love. The girl would forgive these people everything, would accept them and understand. But no one came. Life in the orphanage was not sweet. Cruel children, angry educators. Quiet and modest, Polly had a hard time. She lived in anticipation of the next blow, the next bullying. The children sensed such quiet children and used them for their own amusement. They'd lock Polly in a dark bathroom at night. New Year's gifts donated by the city administration were taken away from her. Her clothes were often covered with paint or plastic. More than once, Polly was beaten just to show her strength and superiority. And the girl, she could not fight back or complain. Once, Polly told the teachers about the bullying of peers. She herself was accused. Adults said that she needs to be more communicative, need to find a common language with other people, scared her with diagnosis, but the offenders were also punished. But it didn't make Polly feel any better. On the contrary, she was then spotted in the yard, dragged behind the gazebo, and beaten again for tattling. More, the girl to adults for help did not ask for help. Polly did not study very well, and she would like to become an excellent student, stretched for knowledge, read a lot, but nothing worked. Lessons were impossible to learn, interfered other pupils, made noise, molested, even sometimes took away notebooks and textbooks. In the orphanage, striving for knowledge and diligent study was considered something almost shameful. Polly was called a nerd, bookworm, humiliated. In general, in the orphanage, no one really learned, and teachers gave lessons for a tick. Once, Polly even heard a conversation between teachers. The math teacher contemptuously threw the Russian teacher an offensive phrase, "What's the point of talking in front of these morons anyway? They will be of no use, and the footsteps of their miserable parents will go, from an aspen will not be born oranges." Polly got tears in her eyes. Is that how they're treated? No, she had known before that the children from the orphanage no one is not particularly sympathetic, but it's one thing to assume, but it's another to hear such words in her own address. The most unpleasant thing was that Polly realized the teacher was right. That's the way it really is. Probably accidentally heard that very conversation, Polly, and realized it is not worth dreaming of happiness, of a bright future. Nothing good would happen to her, and she shouldn't even try. Polly went to college to become a pastry chef, studied well, aware that it is unlikely to find a place in the specialty. Too narrow specialization, and she was not very good at it. Hands poorly obeyed and could not repeat the operations that showed the teachers. Polly realized at the beginning that it was not hers, but all the orphanage girls were sent to learn to be a pastry chef, so they sent her. Nothing calmed the curator of the group, unexpectedly heartfelt, caring woman. She immediately took a liking to Polly. She felt sorry for her, which was quite unusual. Few people work in the profession nowadays. You'll find yourself in life, don't worry, girl. Having reached adulthood, Polly graduated from the orphanage. It was a day she greeted with joy. Deliverance at last, a confusing adult life lay ahead. Now she'd have to make her own way. No one is responsible for her now. But the end of bullying peers and cruel punishments of educators. From the state, as a round orphan, Polly received an apartment on the outskirts of the city. The house is old, 3 stories high, the floors are creaky, the room is tiny, but it was her own place, an island of tranquility where Polly was a full-fledged mistress. At first, the girl was even dizzy with happiness. She could do what she wanted, to cook something delicious in her own kitchen, lie in bed, and read, without fear that someone would take away her book, to watch late into the night on a hand-me-down TV, an old cracked screen. So what? It works. The first time Polly lived on the money that had accumulated on her account during her stay in the orphanage. Each pupil received a certain amount, and graduates were warned to find a job before these savings ran out. Polly knew it was important. She'd seen how fast the money was being spent, especially since at first, she was inexperienced and didn't know how to save money at all. Then she learned. Later, as Polly thought, she couldn't get a job as a pastry chef. Yes, and it's not her. The girl understood everything about herself and assessed her skills quite adequately. Fortunately, there were many other options. Polly tried to work as a cashier in a supermarket, but it didn't work out. There, it required assertiveness, boldness, and even the skill of a psychologist. Polly could not count money lightning fast. She could not quickly serve customers. She was always dissatisfied, and at the end of the shift, a shortage necessarily came out for Polly, which was deducted, of course, from her salary. As a result, the girl received pennies, which were not even enough for food. It was good, though. Her orphan savings had not yet been completely spent, and once Polly even owed her master for the month, the salary was not enough to cover the shortfall, so Polly quit for good. There's no telling what kind of shortfall she'll get next time. Polly started looking for work again. Now her situation was desperate. She had no money at all. Luckily, a neighbor helped. She told her that a janitor was needed at the community center. Polly, without hesitation, grabbed the offer. The work of a janitor, the girl, at that time, had the vaguest ideas. Already in the course of business, Polly realized that this work was to her liking. It is pleasant to spend time in the fresh air. It is pleasant to communicate with the residents of the house. It is pleasant to make the territory cleaner. It's nice to hear words of gratitude for the timely removal of dry leaves and sanded slippery paths. Fate prepared another surprise and brought Alex together. Young people, completely alone in this world, suddenly found each other, and it became happiness for both of them. Alex and Polly didn't meet for a long time. A couple of months after their acquaintance, they had already formalized their relationship and began to live together in Polly's small apartment. Alex, as a man, had a hand, and the house became even cozier and more comfortable. The young husband whitewashed the ceilings, painted the walls, fixed the long leaking faucet, even replaced the wiring. He liked to take care of their home with Polly, and Polly, she took care of Alex. She cooked him delicious lunches and dinners, ironed his shirts, and, most importantly, was interested in how his day was. Perhaps that was the most enjoyable part. Both Polly and Alex felt important, needed, loved. Now they were not alone on the entire planet. Life had taken on a whole new color. And then, a wonderful event happened. Polly told her husband that she was expecting a child. The couple didn't seem to be planning heirs so soon, but the news made them both happy, of course, and it was scary. How would they cope with the baby? They do not have anyone who would help, who would prompt, and whether they have enough money for such a luxury. And yet, joyful emotions clearly prevailed in the gamut of stormy feelings of the future parents. Alex took a risky step and quit his job, which paid pennies, and got a job as a lawyer for a private lawyer that offered him a much more substantial salary. But the work was added. He had to study a lot to understand the nuances of complicated cases, to sit in the office late into the night. Alex did it so that Polly could quit her job. He rightly believed that the physical labor of a janitor could have a bad effect on pregnancy. The man's salary was now quite high, but he was a private citizen. His business experienced ups and downs, and sometimes it was jeopardized. And yet, Alex did not regret his decision. Polly settled down at home. took care of the household. Both spouses were looking forward to the arrival of the baby. And then, he was born, small, warm, shouting from the first days, amazingly similar to his father, the same green-eyed and red-haired. Polly and Alex melted into the care of the baby. They named the boy Tim. It was Polly's decision. It was the name of one of her favorite book characters. Alex didn't mind. Tim was Tim, a wonderful name. It turned out that the child is a pleasure, really quite expensive, diapers, special food, clothes from which the baby grew out of lightning fast, not to mention medications, strollers, cribs, toys. Alex was getting by. He worked like hell to make sure his family didn't need anything. They had food, they had necessities, they paid their rent. Of course, the young family couldn't afford anything extra, trips to the sea, dinners in restaurants, expensive gadgets. All this remained so far unavailable, but the spouses were not discouraged. It seemed to both of them that they still have everything ahead of them. Polly was busy with the baby in the house, Alex was working, and everything would be fine, except that in the cramped apartment, Polly, with the appearance of Tim and not to turn around, became not only the number of tenants increased, but also the number of things. Very soon, the couple realized that they just need to expand. Tim was growing up. He needed more and more space, ideally his own room. A single room would do, but then at least it would be newer and more spacious. And the family was not particularly satisfied with the neighborhood. School and kindergarten are far away. The nearest bus stop was also at least 15 minutes away. In summer, it's still okay, but in winter, try to get there. In general, Alex and Polly pondered and decided they needed a mortgage. The money for the down payment can be obtained from the sale of the old cramped one-room Polly Village house Alex inherited from his mother. Of course, it was quite risky to lose all the living space to get into debt at once, but Alex had a good salary at the time. Tim was growing up. The time was approaching when Polly would be able to go to work. The payment seemed manageable, acceptable to the couple. And so it began. At first, everything was going just fine. Buyers were found quickly, even for the village house, although with him, Alex sensed big problems. The proceeds went partly for the down payment on the mortgage, partly for repairs. Polly and Alex took a spacious one-bedroom apartment in a new neighborhood, bright, clean, in which no one had lived before them. The renovations were done quickly. They had the money. They furnished the rooms with inexpensive but fresh and modern furniture. They hung beautiful curtains and decorated the walls with framed photos. The pictures were of them, of course, Polly, Alex, and little Tim. Alex liked to remember the first New Year's Eve at the new place. They had just finished the renovations. The room still had the distinctive smell of wallpaper glue and furniture straight from the store. Beautiful, clean, cozy, a huge, almost ceiling-high Christmas tree occupied the corner of the living room near the window. Little Tim, in funny pajamas, looked mesmerized at the flashing lights of the garlands that girdled the fluffy beauty. The overhead lights went out. The garlands and the flickering TV screen created a cozy, almost fairy tale atmosphere. Alex looked at his wife and son, at the simply but tastefully furnished apartment, at the table covered with incredibly tasty dishes, potatoes with chicken, salads, fruit, and of course, champagne. What New Year's Eve is without champagne? At that moment, Alex felt happy and peaceful. His favorite relatives were near him. It seemed that things would only get better from now on. Alex was satisfied with himself. He could do it all. He had succeeded. What they had never dreamed of had come true. On that magical, calm evening, the couple had no idea what trials fate was already preparing for them. It all began the very next year. Tim got to kindergarten. The baby got used to the preschool institution surprisingly easily. No caprices and tantrums, no endless illnesses, which frightened young parents, acquaintances. Everything went as smoothly. Polly went to work. She was lucky. She was taken as a kitchen assistant in the restaurant. The work is not particularly hard and responsible, and the salary is much more than the salary of a janitor. The mortgage payment was a big part of the family's expenses, so an extra penny here was very happy. Then, in the fall, misfortunes fell on Polly and Alex like a cornucopia. Still quite young and blooming, Polly suddenly began to weaken. Dizziness, nausea, loss of appetite. At first, Alex and Polly assumed pregnancy. They were both frightened. They were not yet ready for a second child, primarily financially. The couple realized they couldn't afford it, but getting rid of the baby was out of the question. In general, they gathered their courage and went to the doctor at the women's clinic. The couple was shocked. No pregnancy, but Polly's test turned out to be alarming. The woman was strongly recommended to be examined by a therapist. Polly, of course, made an appointment. The examination took up a lot of her time and energy. She had to constantly leave work, which of course did not please the boss. His wife's eyes during this period were somehow guilty, still anxious, and confused. Alex's heart clenched with pity when he looked at his wife, but the man then still believed that everything would be all right. Well, some vitamin deficiency or some organ that's malfunctioning, no problem. They'll find the fault, treat it, and everything will be as before. The diagnosis sounded like a thunderclap, a rare blood disorder, presumably hereditary. Polly couldn't check the doctor's guess. Of course, she knew nothing about her relatives, and who cares where the disease came from. The main treatment was long, expensive, and no one gave a guarantee. Doctors, with ruthless truthfulness, immediately outlined the most likely scenario. Most likely, the disease, despite treatment, will progress. All medical manipulations can only briefly delay the inevitable. Polly was quite resistant to her diagnosis, or maybe she was just pretending, braving it for her husband and son. Alex, on the other hand, felt like he'd been hit over the head with a sandbag. For a long time, he felt stunned, exhausted, completely disoriented. How could it be? Where did this misfortune come from all of a sudden? After all, they had only just made it out, only just started a new life. They had so many plans, so many wonderful ideas. Then Alex came to his senses, accepted the situation, and began to act. First of all, to look for doctors who had experience in treating patients like his wife. All this was not cheap, to put it mildly. I had to sell something, get into loans, and no one canceled the mortgage. Alex was working alone again. Polly was weakened, and the treatment was taking up most of her time. Tim was happy, not sick, well-behaved, becoming more and more conscious and independent. He OD'd that mommy was sick, daddy has to work a lot, and learn to serve himself. To prepare clothes for the morning, to pour tea for himself and his mother, to make sandwiches. The little boy was growing up before his eyes. People around him praised Tim, setting him as an example for their children. Alex wished he didn't have to do all this, let his son, like other kids his age, not know how to tie his shoelaces or how to make an omelet. Polly wasn't getting the treatment they could afford. The family went into debt, but it was all for nothing. The young woman was fading into a pale shadow of herself. Alex pounded the thresholds of charitable foundations, tried to get the advice of eminent professors. The latter sometimes succeeded, only these luminaries of medicine were throwing up their hands. Polly's disease was poorly understood, unpredictable, no one knew how to help the young woman. Conventional treatments had little effect on her. Eventually, Polly was admitted to a hospital. At that point, she had already been sick for about 3 years. The woman couldn't even eat anymore, so she became so weak. Alex prepared for a long struggle, even found a nurse who, for a fee, would take care of his wife more carefully. It didn't work. Polly didn't even live 24 hours after she was admitted to the hospital. Alex couldn't believe what had happened. He was once again experiencing a terrible, unfair loss. The situation was aggravated by the fact that now the man was not only responsible for himself, he had a son, and Tim had to explain that his mom was gone. And then another blow, Alex lost his job. The law firm he'd worked for the last few years went bankrupt. The owner of the company was always on the edge, taking risks for big profits, so he miscalculated one day. So Alex was also out of work. After all, during Polly's illness, the family has accumulated a lot of debts, and the mortgage payment was a heavy burden. Alex found a new job. It paid much less, but there was no other way out. It's not easy to get a good job that time. Alex had been lucky to find a big paycheck, or unlucky, since his earnings were so unstable. The man worked in the office during the day, and in the evenings he worked part-time, helping to unload a truck at the store or taking part in repairs. Tim was on his own the whole time. He did not complain. The boy could always keep himself busy. Tim liked to draw. He took pencils or paints, a sheet of paper, and as if he turned off from reality, he went away from the gray reality, created whole worlds with bright rainbows, dense forests, and cute, big-eyed animals, the kind you don't see in real life. Alex didn't worry that his son would stay hungry. The main thing was to have something in the refrigerator: bread, sausage, eggs, milk, frozen dumplings. Tim was fine with lunch and dinner. He also fed his father, who was tired after work. That's how we lived until it turned out that the apartment was going to the bank for debts. At that time, there were overdue mortgages and loans, so they asked the man and his child to vacate the premises. Alex, as a lawyer, tried to fight for his property. He filed for bankruptcy, tried to explain his difficult situation to people, to no avail. In the end, in order not to attract the attention of the guardianship authorities, they had to accept it. That's how Alex and Tim ended up in the hostel. Felix immediately made friends with them. He liked honest, hard-working Alex. He liked serious Tim, so mature for his 6 years. It can be said that all three of them became buddies, or even friends. They often had dinner together. Felix periodically took Tim for a walk. Alex worked a lot, and sitting in a dark hostel was boring for the child, so Felix went for walks with the boy. They talked about everything in the world, discussed different situations, told each other something about themselves. Felix learned that Tim really wants to become an artist, but the little boy realized that he had to study for that. Tim also knew that his father had no money or time to take him to art classes or art school. This was discouraging for Tim, but the kid did not lose heart, thinking that he would go to the first grade, and there would probably be free classes for students. School was not far off. It was less than a year away. If Tim waited for the beginning of school with joyful impatience, his father dreaded this moment because then his and Tim's little homeless family would be guaranteed to be on the radar of the child welfare authorities. A child should have a home, a workplace, his own bed, and little Tim is living in a hostel, basically wandering around with his homeless father. Of course, no one will leave the boy to a loser parent. The child will be taken to an orphanage. Alex knew very well what it was like for the kids there. Polly told him enough for the man to try by all means to avoid the same scenario for his own child, but he didn't have enough strength, and there was no help. Alex was ready to work, to plow through several jobs, which, as a matter of fact, he did, but all these efforts did not bring the desired result. It was a long time before he could buy his own place. Alex had savings, but they would not be enough for a small part of the down payment. In short, the situation was desperate. Felix cringed at the icy wind or at the sudden rush of thoughts and memories. Yes, it was not a gentle fall. I can't wait for winter. Snow will fall. It will be brighter, more beautiful, softer. Little Tim is looking forward to the new year, to receive presents, to sit at the festive table, to make a wish. He is an adult Tim, independent, but still a child, still quite a boy. Sincerely believes that the mysterious under the chimes of the wish will come true. And Felix knew perfectly well what he would ask Santa Claus, or whoever. He knew exactly what little Tim's dream was. The boy would ask for an apartment for him and his father, and an art school for himself. Too bad none of that will come true anytime soon. Felix will give Tim something he'll love. Already picked up a young artist's kit at the store. It's expensive, of course, but nothing's too good for Tim. A suitcase, an easel with a set of paints, pencils, and felt-tip pens. The anticipation of Tim's eyes is lighting up at the sight of this splendor. Felix felt warm at heart. It is so nice to please loved ones, and the children, so doubly. Only this miracle suitcase will not solve the problems of a little boy and his father, only partially brighten the gray everyday life of the child. At least that's it. Felix finally climbed from the bridge to the embankment. Now he walked along the parapet, hurrying to work. There was no way he could be late. Jack valued him, including for performance and reliability. He didn't want to let the man down. And then Felix noticed a crowd of men and women, teenagers and children, crowded around the lantern. They were talking excitedly. Someone was calling somewhere. Someone was filming something on his phone. Felix followed the gazes of these people. He was stunned. He did not expect to see such a thing. In the dark waves of the wide river, 50 m from the shore, there was something, or rather, someone. A human head emerged from the water and then disappeared again. This someone was drowning. He had no strength left. How did a man end up in the river at this? There was no time to speculate about it. Felix, without giving himself time to think over the desperate act, had already swung over the parapet. The man immediately crossed the strip of beach. Sand clogged in his sneakers tickled his feet. The man ran to the water's edge, throwing off his jacket, sweater, shoes, all of which became heavy in the cold waves of the river. It would become additional ballast. Felix was an excellent swimmer. The river was very close to his village. As a child, he used to spend whole days there with the local boys, swam against the clock, dived from heights, just splashed, and went crazy. Felix felt like a fish in water at the age of 5 or 6, pun intended. But, of course, the man never went into the river in this weather, cold wind and strong current. He'd never rescued a drowning person before, but Felix realized if he didn't try to pull this man out, no one would help the unfortunate man. We should at least try, the man very well imagined now the despair of a drowning man. There are so many people around, but they're all just staring. Somebody's calling the rescue team. Will they make it in time? It's a matter of seconds. The icy water burned his feet. Felix shivered but stepped forward. He knew it would be cold at first, and then his body would adapt, and so it did. And now the man is already approaching the drowning man with powerful rows. It is hard to swim strong current wind, and there is a lot of garbage in the water, some branches, snags, tina, dried algae. Felix had less and less strength left, but he saw the goal in front of him, a head with dark hair that covered his face. He was close enough to get a good look at the person. It appeared to be a young girl or even a child, pale face, eyes black with despair and horror. The drowning woman was struggling to live. She must have been a good swimmer or she would have gone under long ago. But in any case, if Felix did not hurry, it would be so. And now, finally, the man is very close. He swam up to the girl from behind. The necessary knowledge rose from the depths of memory. A drowning man, in a desperate attempt to survive, can even drown his saviors. So Felix kept his distance. It was a good thing the girl had long hair. Felix grabbed hold of it and pulled her towards the shore. The girl felt that help had arrived. At first, she wanted to reach Felix, to cling to him, but he wouldn't let go. Then the girl sort of realized what was happening, even relaxed a little, and let herself be pulled out. She wouldn't have been able to handle the current alone. The girl was very thin, almost transparent. Already on the shore, silently looking into the face of her rescuer, the poor girl lost consciousness. Here they were already waiting. Someone wrapped Felix with a plaid, someone covered the girl. An ambulance siren was wailing in the distance. The man looked around and realized that everything would be all right now. Only then his hands trembled, and for some reason, his teeth chattered, whether from the cold or from the fear he had experienced. Felix could have lost the girl himself at that water temperature. The focus of attention shifted to the girl. The doctors arrived, and a tall man dressed in an expensive leather jacket came rushing in. I think it was the girl's father. At least they both had the same hazel-colored eyes, dark russet hair, large noses, and chiseled cheekbones. Felix didn't wait for the story to unfold. He dressed quickly and hurried to Jack. Surely the boss will adequately perceive the lateness when Felix told him the reason. But Jack was late that day himself, so he didn't even have to explain himself. Felix was hurrying to the store to buy milk for the morning when he was called. The man slowly turned around and met his gaze with familiar hazel eyes. In front of him was a man in a stylish leather jacket, the girl's father who had somehow ended up in the water that day. I finally found you, the man smiled, extending his hand to Felix. It wasn't easy. My name is Andrew. I'm the father of the teenager you rescued. Hello, mumbled Felix. He realized that this man wanted to thank him, and Felix himself could not wait to know what happened to the girl, what her condition is now, how she was in the water all these days. The man thought a lot about the rescued girl. I wanted to believe that she was okay. Praise for social media, the man continued. One of the people who were on the embankment at the time posted a video. This video clearly shows how you saved my Mia. A brave act, desperate. There aren't many people like you out there right now, and how lucky you were there when you did. How's the girl? Felix was pleased to hear Andrew's words, but also so uncomfortable. Mia's fine. She's in rehab now, so she's still hurt. Then, not physically, just a little cold. That's not the point. Do you know how she ended up in the river? Did you see that moment? Felix shook his head negatively. All because of unrequited love. She fell in love with some boy, and he started dating someone else. Mia got herself all worked up, and so she did. Now she's in counseling, she's under observation, and she's on the mend. Or, as it turns out, she realized right away what a stupid thing she'd done right after she got in the icy water. It would have been too late if it hadn't been for you. The main thing is that everything is fine now. Felix smiled. It was an accidental impulse, I think. This situation has taught your girl a lot. It taught me a lot, Andrew admitted. For many years in the business, I thought that there are no kind, selfless people who are ready to be like you. Cynical became cold, callous. Your act, it taught me a lot and made me rethink all my values. Yay, I've changed a lot, Felix nodded. What's there to say? I want to thank you. I have opportunities. I know you live in a hostel, you don't have your own corner. Ask for anything you want, anything at all. People like you deserve a better fate. Felix thought for a moment. He remembered Alex's worried eyes when he received another notice from the guardianship authorities. Remembered little Tim talking inspirationally about his dream, the dream of being an artist. My life suits me just fine, Felix said at last, but there is one person, a small person, who could definitely use your help, Felix. Tim, like a fighter jet, ran towards Felix, and the latter, smiling, spread his arms apart to catch the boy and twirl him as he likes. Felix. I took first place in the city drawing contest for that drawing of mine with the cosmos, remember? I showed it to you. Of course, I remember. I told you this was going to happen. Alex came up next. They agreed to go for a walk in the park that Sunday afternoon. Tim liked to run along the asphalt paths, feed the ducks in the pond, watch funny girls, and Felix and Alex liked to sit in the local cafe. There they cooked fragrant kebab, melting in the mouth. Since that very conversation with Andrew, a little over a year has passed. The wealthy businessman was amazed at Felix's request. Then, after all, he did not ask for himself. He wanted to save his friend with a small child, two people in a desperate situation. Andrew bought Alex a one-room apartment, but in a new building, in a good neighborhood. There was a gymnasium, and importantly, an art school nearby. Alex enrolled Tim in it at the first opportunity. Since then, the boy's talent developed by leaps and bounds. His drawings became more and more professional and correct, but at the same time, did not lose their uniqueness, spontaneity. Of course, Andrew could not help but do something for Felix personally, although he did not ask him to do so first. The businessman and Felix bought an apartment next to Alex and Tim. They became neighbors, but no longer on the bunks in the hostel. In the second place, Andrew gave the savior of his daughter a high-paying job, took to himself as a gardener. Felix always liked to mess around in the ground, taking care of plants. Here he was in his place. Mia, Andrew's daughter, at first, they shunned the new gardener, for some reason. She was probably afraid of the memories of him, but then they became friends. The girl, as it turned out, regretted her act, and now, after a while, could not explain even to herself how she had decided to do such a thing. Sometimes Felix looked at Mia, tall, thin, touching, and his heart clenched at the thought of what would have happened if he had not had time to pull the girl out of the water. Alex and Felix walked slowly along the park path. Ahead of them was a happy Tim on a scooter. "There you are. I thought you would wait for me at the fountain." Felix turned around, smiled, and hurried towards a short woman with piercing blue eyes, Lily. They had met recently, but it was already clear that it was serious. Today they had agreed to go out together as a fun, noisy group. It was going to be a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us today on Deep Stories. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video.